It was November the 27th, 1944. At precisely 11:11 in the morning, the earth opened. Not because of an earthquake, and not because of an enemy air raid, but because deep beneath the quiet countryside of Staffordshire, Britain had accidentally created one of the most dangerous places on earth. In less than a second, thousands of tons of high explosive detonated underground. A farm disappeared, a reservoir burst apart, and buildings that had stood moments earlier were simply gone. The blast was so powerful that people dozens of miles away thought the war had arrived on their doorstep. Yet today, almost nobody remembers it. The British government buried the details, and the official investigation disappeared behind wartime secrecy. Because of this, one of the largest accidental explosions in history slowly faded from public memory, and to some it is known as the forgotten disaster. This is the story of the RAF Fauld Explosion, the largest explosion ever to occur on British soil, and one of the most devastating accidental non-nuclear explosions the world has ever seen. It's a disaster that killed dozens of people, permanently scarred the landscape, and left behind a crater so vast that it can still be seen today, nearly 80 years later. For the people living and working around Hanbury, it began like countless other wartime Mondays. At Upper Castle Hayes Farm, daily chores were already underway. Livestock needed feeding, equipment needed maintaining, and, despite the war that had consumed Europe for more than 5 years, life in this corner of England still followed the familiar rhythms of the countryside. A short distance away, workers arrived at the Peter Ford and Sons gypsum works. Others disappeared underground into a vast network of tunnels that most local people knew only as the dump. There, hidden beneath fields, farms and country lanes, thousands of tons of bombs waited in darkness for the day they would be loaded onto trains and sent to RAF airfields across Britain. Among those working at the depot were RAF personnel, civilian labourers and Italian prisoners of war. Many had been carrying out the same tasks for months, even years. The work was dangerous, but routine has a way of dulling fear. Bombs arrived, were stored, inspected and dispatched, and after enough repetitions, even a job surrounded by explosives could begin to feel ordinary. Eventually, what should have seemed extraordinary became just another day's work. And that, perhaps, was the greatest danger of all, because beneath the peaceful Staffordshire countryside sat enough explosive power to destroy an entire district of a city. And on the morning of the 27th of November 1944, a chain of events was already beginning that would unleash it. To understand how this catastrophe happened, we need to go back to the final years of the Second World War. By late 1944, Britain had been at war for more than 5 years. The D-Day landings had gone ahead, and Allied forces were advancing across Europe. But victory was far from guaranteed. Every day, RAF bombers launched missions against industrial centres, rail networks, military installations and strategic targets deep inside Nazi Germany. Those aircraft required an endless supply of bombs, and those munitions needed to be stored somewhere safe. Above-ground depots were vulnerable to German air attack, so military planners began looking underground for safer alternatives. Years earlier, in 1937, with another European war increasingly likely, the Air Ministry had purchased 450,000 square feet of disused gypsum workings near Hanbury, about 5 miles northeast of Burton-upon-Trent. The site, which had tunnels 12 feet high and 20 feet wide, eventually became RAF Fauld, housing No. 21 Maintenance Unit RAF Bomb Storage Dump. The tunnels were dry, stable, naturally concealed and seemingly ideal for storing explosive ordnance. Over the years, the facility expanded into a subterranean labyrinth, and what had once been a mine became a hidden arsenal beneath the English countryside. The dump was shrouded in secrecy, but by 1944, over 1,000 people were employed there. An underground railway network was constructed, linked to the mainline sidings at Scropton, and the bombs and ammunition were distributed by rail to the country's wartime airfields, a vital supply of munitions for use in the war against Germany. By late 1944, the depot contained almost every type of munition the RAF might need. High explosive bombs, incendiaries, ammunition, depth charges, and detonators were stacked throughout the underground complex, along with vast quantities of other explosive material. In total, nearly 4,000 tons of high explosives were believed to be stored within the part of the complex involved in the disaster. Few of the people living and working above had any idea it was there. As the war intensified, pressure on the depot increased. Bombs moved in and out constantly, storage capacity was stretched, and workloads grew heavier with each passing month. To keep operations running, RAF personnel worked alongside civilian labourers and Italian prisoners of war. By late 1944, the Italian prisoners were no longer viewed as active enemies. After Italy changed sides the previous year, many found themselves supporting the Allied war effort, carrying out work that was vital to Britain's military operations. At RAF Fauld, they too would become victims of what happened next. The handling of explosives was governed by strict regulations. Special tools were required. Damaged munitions demanded specialist attention, and detailed procedures existed for almost every situation that the workers might encounter. Every one of those rules had been written for a reason, because somewhere somebody had already learned the consequences of getting it wrong. But wartime pressure has a way of eroding safety standards. When supplies are urgently needed, when deadlines loom, and when people become accustomed to working around danger every day, shortcuts can begin to feel harmless. And history repeatedly shows that disasters often begin not with panic, but with routine. A small compromise here, a harmless-looking shortcut there. Maybe a decision that seems insignificant in the moment. On the morning of November 27, 1944, somewhere inside RAF Fauld, one of those decisions may have been made. Deep within a section known as the No. 4 Bomb Store, workers were carrying out routine operations among rows of tightly packed bombs. At some point, attention focused on a particular munition. Accounts vary, but investigators later concluded that a problem existed with one of the bomb's detonator assemblies. Under normal circumstances, work should have stopped immediately. The area should have been secured and specialist personnel called. That was the official procedure. But according to the later Board of Inquiry, someone chose another option. Instead of waiting, a worker apparently attempted to free the damaged component using an unauthorized metal tool. Most sources describe it as a brass chisel, although some suggest it may have been steel. The exact details remain uncertain. What matters is that it was a tool never meant to be used in direct contact with a live explosive device. We'll never know exactly what was going through that worker's mind. Perhaps they were trying to save time. Perhaps they had done something similar before without incident. Or perhaps they genuinely believed there was no danger. Whatever the reason, the decision would prove catastrophic. In the cold, dim tunnels of No. 4 Bomb Store, thousands of tons of explosives surrounded the workers on all sides. Workers were carrying out ordinary tasks with no sense of impending disaster. And then came the strike of the tool on the detonator. At 11:11 a.m, there was a flash, a detonation, and then all hell erupted beneath Staffordshire. The initial explosion triggered nearby munitions, which in turn triggered others. Within fractions of a second, an unstoppable chain reaction raced through the underground storage complex as thousands of tons of explosives detonated almost simultaneously. The earth above the mine simply ceased to behave like solid ground. Rock, soil, and clay were hurled skyward with unimaginable force. Witnesses described a colossal column of smoke, dust, and debris rising thousands of feet into the air. Many compared it to a giant mushroom cloud. The explosion was heard for miles around. People as far away as Birmingham and Coventry reported hearing the blast, and the shockwave was so powerful that seismic instruments recorded the event hundreds of miles away. Windows shattered across surrounding towns and buildings shook violently. Some people believed an earthquake had struck. Others feared Germany had somehow launched a devastating new weapon against Britain. Above the mine, devastation unfolded instantly. Upper Castle Hayes Farm sat directly above part of the underground complex. In moments, the land beneath it collapsed. Buildings, livestock, equipment, and 6 human lives disappeared into the void. The farm was effectively erased from existence. One moment it had been part of the landscape, the next it was gone. The local pub, the Cock Inn, was also demolished. And nothing illustrates the scale of the disaster more clearly than what happened next. Nearby stood a massive reservoir. The explosion shattered its dam, and almost instantly, millions of gallons of water, mixed with blasted earth, rock and debris, surged down the valley with terrifying force. Directly in its path stood the lime and gypsum works. Workers inside had little warning, although some may have heard the explosion and felt the ground shake. But before anyone could comprehend what was happening, the wave struck. Buildings collapsed, machinery vanished beneath mud and debris. Workers were trapped and buried. The flood continued through the surrounding landscape, tearing through roads, fields and homes and other farms. And when the dust finally settled, the countryside looked like a battlefield. Where rolling farmland had once stood, there now existed a vast scar in the earth, a crater measuring hundreds of feet across and plunging deep into the ground. The rescue effort began almost immediately, but conditions were extremely difficult. Underground tunnels had collapsed, toxic gases filled many sections, and rescuers faced the constant threat of further explosions. Teams dug through unstable debris, mud and wreckage in desperate searches for survivors, but in some places the mud hardened rapidly, trapping victims where they had fallen. As the hours passed, hope began to fade. Some of those caught in the explosion had simply vanished beneath the collapsed tunnels and shattered landscape. Families waited for news that never came, while rescuers faced the heartbreaking reality that many of the missing might never be recovered. For some families, there would be no body to bury, no grave to visit, only a name on a future memorial, and an unanswered question buried somewhere beneath the Staffordshire countryside. Even today, historians debate the exact number of lives lost. Official figures place the death toll at around 70. Other estimates suggest the true figure may have been higher. The chaos of the explosion, the collapse of the tunnels, and the inability to recover every victim means the full human cost may never be known. Yet even as rescue operations continued, another effort was already underway. An effort not to uncover the truth, but to control it. We have to remember this was wartime Britain, and the outcome of the war still hung in the balance. The government feared that news of a catastrophic military accident could damage morale at home and provide valuable propaganda to Nazi Germany, so information was restricted. Reports were carefully controlled, and the full scale of the disaster remained hidden from much of the public. Most significantly, the official Board of Inquiry was conducted behind closed doors, and its findings remained classified for decades. Families received limited information, and questions went unanswered, and for years, one of Britain's greatest peacetime disasters existed largely in the shadows. Only later, in 1974, when the report was declassified, would historians begin piecing together what had truly happened beneath the Staffordshire countryside. Today, much of RAF Fauld has fallen silent. The railway lines have gone, the bomb stores have long since emptied, and the frantic wartime activity has disappeared beneath woodland and undergrowth. To a casual visitor, it can seem difficult to imagine that one of the largest accidental explosions in history happened here at all. But the scar remains. The crater, now known as the Hanbury crater, still exists as a silent reminder of the events of that November morning. Visitors who stand at its edge often struggle to comprehend its size. It is less a crater than a huge wound in the landscape, a permanent monument to the destructive power that was hidden beneath the earth. Nearby memorials honour the civilians, military personnel and prisoners of war who lost their lives. Some have graves, some do not. Some remain buried somewhere beneath the ground where the explosion occurred. The RAF Fauld disaster wasn't caused by enemy action or advanced technology. It appears to have been caused by something far more familiar: pressure, complacency, and shortcuts. The belief that one small rule can be ignored without consequence. History shows us that catastrophic disasters rarely begin with a dramatic moment. They begin quietly, with assumptions, routine, and the feeling that nothing could possibly go wrong. On the morning of November the 27th, 1944, that assumption created an explosion powerful enough to reshape the landscape of Britain itself. And beneath the quiet woods of Staffordshire, its legacy still echoes to this day. When I first researched this particular disaster, I was staggered by the size of the explosion. And I think it's quite ironic that this happened only months before 2 more mushroom clouds would appear in the world at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Despite the tragedy and the loss of life, I hope you appreciated the way the information was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll wish you bye-bye for now.